I planned and paid for my dad's 50th birthday party, but he got drunk, insulted my late mom, called me a mistake, and asked me to leave to be with his real family. My parents broke up when I was just 6 years old. They got married young, but after the honeymoon phase ended, they started to fight a lot. Both of them were working overtime to pay bills that were piling up while also paying for their student loans. The year that they were supposed to get a divorce, my mom found out that she was pregnant. For reasons beyond my understanding, they decided to give their marriage one last try. This was a big mistake because my earliest memories of my childhood are of my parents yelling at each other as loudly as possible. Every morning would start this way. My mother would go off on my dad for not cleaning up after himself and not helping around the house, while my dad would counter with complaints about my mom's cooking abilities and how she was a good-for-nothing woman. He would have an issue if she made pancakes, toast, or waffles, because no matter what she did, he just wasn't in the mood for it. He would always compare her with his mother and say how he wished he had never married her. She would counter by saying that she should have married a richer man and that she regretted having a child with him. This was pretty much every day. Sometimes I would just try to block out the noise in the background, playing with my food. But it did leave a lasting impression on me, as it sort of made me realize that both of them kind of blamed me for why they could not leave each other. My dad would purposefully come back home late at night so he would not have to spend any time with me or my mom. If my mom complained about feeling overworked, he would snort and tell her how his job was more important than hers. If I ever wanted to play with him, he would be okay and nice to me for 30 minutes, but beyond that, he would start to get irritated and scold me for being so needy. I was just a child at that time, but I remember him saying that to me so much that even now, as an adult, I'm afraid of coming off as needy with other people. Slowly, our home life became even worse. As time went on, my mom would spend her evenings drinking, while my dad would come home drunk from the bar and stomp off to the couch just to pass out. Both of them started missing work since sometimes they would not even wake up on time to get me ready for school. The weekends were much worse, as I spent so many evenings hungry because both of my parents were too intoxicated or hungover to cook or even order takeout. It was a never-ending cycle of chaos and neglect. I understand now that what my parents did could put them in jail, but at that time, I had no other adult around to protect me. My teachers would sometimes talk to me and later call my parents to have a conversation, but since there was no evidence of physical abuse on me, no one really cared enough to call CPS. As I grew older, I became the unofficial mediator between my parents every time they would fight. Mind you, I was still a child, but I thought keeping the peace at home was somehow my responsibility. I knew what my parents disliked about each other. For example, my mom hated that my dad never picked up his socks or towel after himself, so I started doing that every day, thinking this would result in fewer fights. I knew my dad hated my mother watching loud TV on the couch, so before my dad came back home every night, I would urge my mom to lower the volume. It was difficult for me as a child to try to calm my parents' temper or distract them from their conflicts, but regardless of what I did, they would end up having an argument one way or the other. It was a heavy burden for me to carry as a child, and I often found myself feeling overwhelmed and helpless. I wished for a peaceful home where I could feel safe and loved, but instead, I lived in a constant state of tension and anxiety. On several occasions, I have even witnessed my parents get into a physical fight, and then my mother would lock herself in the bathroom for hours to save herself. One night, their fight got even worse. My mother threw a glass bottle at my dad, straight to his face, and he started bleeding from his nose. My mother yelled at me to call. Some of the things have been blocked out, but I do remember the police questioning me about the fight. CPS was finally called, and my parents got a verbal warning that next time this would happen, I would be taken away. They pretended to care in front of the officers, but I doubt whether they genuinely did. They did talk to me later after everyone left and promised me that they would work to become better people. However, that promise didn't last long. Despite their efforts to salvage their marriage, it was clear that my parents were not compatible. They had different priorities, values, and communication styles that clashed at every turn. I could see the toll it took on both of them, as well as on me. Thankfully, when I was 13, they finally decided to end their marriage for good. It was a relief in some ways, knowing that the constant turmoil would finally come to an end. But it also marked the beginning of a new chapter filled with its own challenges and adjustments. I had to split my time between my parents' separate homes. My mother got child support from my dad and looked for a job to support herself and me. In the beginning, it was really difficult for her to find one, but my uncle, her cousin, helped her get a desk job as a secretary where she worked for several years under a kind and patient boss who paid her quite well. I met her boss and his family several times during work parties, and I'm still really grateful that he had decided to hire my mom, as it genuinely saved our lives and helped pay for everything around the house. My dad, on the other hand, spiraled into drinking more and more. Like there was no tomorrow. This is why I dreaded my visits with my dad, because he would either be passed out drinking, or he would bring a strange woman into the house to hook up with. It was extremely uncomfortable, and I hated it. However, I didn't have much choice, as I was afraid of revealing this to my mom since this would start another one of their huge fights, and I was just tired of it all. Throughout the year, my dad has had different long-term girlfriends. Every year, he dated the first one for a year, the next one for 6 months, and the third one for 3 years straight before cheating on her. I have noticed a pattern in his dating history as they are single mothers with 1 or 2 children. My dad dates these women and gets extremely close with their children. He posts their pictures all over social media and even celebrates birthdays with them. Meanwhile, my mother would have to remind him about important days in my life, like my birthday or prom days, as he would sometimes forget all about it. He would also always force me to mingle with his girlfriend's children, urging me how they are going to be my future brothers and sisters. As you can imagine, I absolutely hated this habit of his. I mean, I understand that my dad was single and was free to date whoever he wanted. But he would always pretend to be this responsible parent in front of other children while neglecting his one and only child. I remember when my school organized the father-daughter dance. I had an inkling that my dad would find an excuse to not attend, and as expected, he did. My mother tried to talk some sense into him, but he kept insisting that one of his girlfriend's kitchens needed some repairs. I was a bit heartbroken, but everything worked out because one of my uncle's mom's cousin took me to the dance, and I had a wonderful time. As I started growing up and my dad kept dating, he would ignore me more and more. He stopped letting me come to his place, telling my mother how he would be out all night drinking or partying, and my mother, rightfully, didn't argue. Things became even worse when, one fine afternoon, my dad called me out of nowhere to ask if I was free for dinner that night. I excitedly agreed, thinking maybe he was finally missing me and wanted to spend some one-on-one time with me. Now imagine my surprise when he came to pick me up in an expensive car, honking loudly outside our house. I ran out to see him sitting next to a blonde woman, and there was an older guy sitting at the back. Later, during dinner, my dad introduced me to his latest girlfriend, Gina, and her son, Robin. Robin was 5 years older than me and looked less than enthusiastic to meet me. Gina did smile at me but kept our conversations to a minimum. Throughout the dinner, my dad kept raving about how great his relationship with Gina and Robin was going and how proud he was of Robin for playing such good football and apparently carrying his whole team to the season win. At one point, Robin even gave a toast to my dad, saying that he had never seen his mother happier with any other man. Clearly, my dad and Gina were in love, all blushing and all over each other. Hence, I was not surprised when a few months later my dad told me that he was getting married to her. He invited me and my mom as guests, and we were happy to be there until I noticed that Robin was my dad's groomsman. My dad and he were laughing side by side, chatting like 2 best friends. I felt this weird sense of jealousy and anger, and I guess my mother must have noticed my expression because she gave me a hug. Throughout the wedding, I watched my dad celebrate with his new family, like this was his very first marriage. He never even once called me for a family picture. The only time he came over to me was to ask my mother and me if we were enjoying ourselves. I felt so invisible, like I didn't belong in his life anymore. As the evening wore on, I became more and more quiet, trying to process the whirlwind of emotions swirling inside of me. I couldn't understand how my dad could be so happy and carefree, while I felt like my world was crumbling around me. Robin seemed to effortlessly fit into my dad's life, effortlessly slipping into the role of his son. When it was time for my mother and I to take leave, my dad didn't even hug me goodbye. I think that was the last time I saw my dad laughing and dancing with his new family. After that, I didn't bother to contact him much. This is how I realized that unless I texted or called him, he didn't really miss me. Several months passed, and although he would continue to send child support, he never once bothered to check in. When it was time for me to go to college, I made sure to choose the university that would be furthest from the city. Even though my mother didn't want me to go so far, I wanted to run away from that miserable place and all the bad memories. I did hear from my mother how my dad had turned his life around completely and had a much better job now and had stopped drinking. It wasn't until months after I had already started college that I received a call from my dad. He told me how surprised he was that I was such a big girl now. I snorted because I wasn't really surprised that he had never noticed anything about me. He continued to ask me about mundane things here and there, trying to make conversation, and then launched into a speech about how Robin had secured a good job, which was incidentally in the same city as my university. He mentioned that he would be coming over with Gina to visit Robin and thought it would be a wonderful idea to meet me as well. I told him that it was fine, but he kept insisting, and eventually I agreed. I probably should not have, but as much as I hated to admit it, I missed my dad. Regardless of his relationship with my mother, I wanted both my parents to love me and treat me like a child. I deserved to be seen, and I hoped that my dad would eventually grow to see that. The evening we were supposed to meet at a cafe near my university, I was all dressed up and excited. However, hours passed, and I sat alone in the cafe, sipping my coffee and looking at the door, but my dad never showed up. I kept calling him, but there was no answer. I told my mother, so she called him as well, worried that maybe something had happened to him. 3 hours later, my dad called me back to inform me that he was caught up with watching a football game with Robin and lost track of time, which is why he could not make it to see me tonight. It felt like a punch to my stomach hearing him so casually saying this, as if I had not just spent the evening excited to finally meet him after so many months. In the background, I could hear Gina and Robin chatting excitedly, so he was clearly still with them. I told him how I had sat alone in the cafe for hours, and he replied that I should have left after the first hour when he didn't show up and tried to give his usual lame apologies. I was so pissed that I just disconnected the call and blocked him. He must have called my mother, but she supported my decision, telling him how he had clearly failed at being a father to me. I cried a lot that night, but the next morning, I felt both guilty and sad about what had happened. I guess my mother's anger and words must have gotten through to my dad, because when I opened my mail app, I was surprised to see a long email from him apologizing to me and begging me to unblock him. He wrote how he never thought his actions could affect me so much and promised that he would do better. I didn't unblock him because I knew I could not keep doing this to my mental health. For months after that, my dad would continue to send me emails where he would sometimes wish me on my birthday or an important festival. However, I would never reply back. Meanwhile, my mother would regularly come up to my university and meet me whenever we both had a break. And I learned to be satisfied with spending time with the only parent who genuinely loved me. During my third year of college, I woke up to several missed calls from a hospital and my mom's side of the family. When I called my relatives back, I learned that my mother had met with an accident and was in critical condition. My heart just dropped, and I packed my bags to leave for my hometown overnight. Thankfully, my roommate agreed to drive me there, so we reached much faster than I had anticipated. I remember collapsing after seeing my mother in the hospital bed with tubes attached to her everywhere. I remember the doctors trying to talk to me, but I could not process anything. My mother had apparently slipped into a coma, and there wasn't much that could be done. 3 days later, she passed away, and the doctors told me that she didn't suffer much. I don't remember much about those days because they are all so blurry. I do remember seeing my dad and just collapsing into his arms while crying. At that moment, I didn't care about my anger toward him and was just grateful that I had someone's shoulder to cry on. Surprisingly, my dad took charge and made sure my mother had a wonderful funeral. Robin and Gina tried their best to be there for me the best that they could. Mom's relatives would regularly show up with cooked meals, ensuring that I was eating every day. I would just lie in bed, unable to move, eat, or sleep. I don't know how I survived those days, but looking back, somehow I did. When it came to reading my mother's will, she had made sure that everything she owned, like the house and her car, which were all paid for, would all be going to me. Her savings account fund was enough for me to finish college without worrying about taking any loans. My dad also agreed to pay for any additional costs if needed, so I had nothing to worry about. I didn't want to sell the house at that time, so I agreed to give it out for rent to a nice couple. And it became a source of income for me. I decided to keep the car for myself, as it could help me get to and from my part-time job. Eventually, I went back to my university, as I was missing out on a lot of classes. My dad would regularly call and message me to ensure that I was doing okay. It was so hard for me to go on living without my mother, and suddenly everything around me felt hollow. My classmates helped me get back on track with my assignments, and my university professors were quite understanding for the most part. During this time, I did get to know Gina and Robin much better, as they would come with my dad to visit me during the weekends. For the first time, I started to feel like my dad was treating me like his family, as he would take me out for football games and dinner. In the beginning, I never really noticed anything negative about Gina, but as time passed on and I started to spend more time around her and my dad, I noticed how she could be a teeny bit judgmental and dramatic. She would argue with my dad like a teen and get angry if he didn't do something exactly like she wanted. For example, if we were coming back from a game and she wanted pizza while we all wanted burgers, she would sit in the driveway pouting and refuse to come inside the house until my dad would agree to order pizza. If my dad refused or complained about how much money she was spending on nails and hair, which was thousands of dollars, by the way, she would threaten to divorce him. She would also comment on other girls' dressing choices, casually saying derogatory terms. It really bothered me because, as a young woman myself, I didn't want to judge or put down any other women for their outfits. Then she would turn around and tell me how she was the popular girl in her high school, and how girls these days couldn't compare to her peak self. It was so cringy that I would have to bite my tongue to not reply with anything rude and would just simply nod. When Robin got a girlfriend, Gina got even nastier. If I was ever invited to any family dinner where Robin was also bringing his girlfriend, Gina would constantly ask rude and uncomfortable questions to the poor girl, like how many men she has slept with and if she is using a condom because, according to Gina, women are out to baby trap her son. Robin would just be uncomfortable throughout this, and if he ever confronted his mother later about this cringy behavior, she would burst into tears and complain to my dad how she only meant well and she's only looking out for her baby son, but he doesn't care. This is pretty much how I knew that Gina was someone I needed to avoid as much as possible without my dad finding out. Whenever he would come to visit me, I would ask him if he and I could spend some time alone, and at first he would agree, but Gina would constantly call him and disturb our time. Later I found out that she was tracking his phone through Find My Phone and would call to check up to see if he was really with me or with some other woman. A year passed, and when my mom's death anniversary arrived, I was a wreck. My dad and I had decided to spend the whole day together so we could visit her grave and then later go out for lunch. I was quite clear to him that it was a very vulnerable day, and I did not want to spend time with anyone else. However, despite my wish, he showed up with Gina, who looked like she was out on a fun road trip. She was constantly munching on chips or playing music. At one point, when I was silently crying because I was missing my mom while going through her photos on my phone, Gina asked me why I was still crying for my mother when it had already been a year since she had passed away. She emphasized the word year as if it was just ridiculous of me to still miss my own mother. This really pissed me off, but I did not want to say anything, hoping that my dad would stand up for me. Sadly, he didn't react at all. Next, when we arrived at my mother's grave with the flowers I had bought, Gina refused to come outside and told my dad and me that we needed to come back as soon as possible since she could not handle the heat. I remember thinking, what was even the point of her coming if all she was going to do was complain? She wasn't even going to pay any respects to my mom and then not even allow us to peacefully pay our respects. We were just 5 minutes late when she started to call my dad's phone, signaling that we needed to wrap up things quickly. I gave up and walked back to the car silently. When it was time for lunch, Gina decided on Chinese food because it was her favorite, although neither my dad nor I were fans. Nonetheless, my dad gave in as usual. Overall, the day was unfolding completely opposite to what I had anticipated. I found myself eating very little at the Chinese buffet, and Gina must have noticed. She asked if something was wrong, but I shook my head, preferring to be left alone with my thoughts. However, Gina then began to criticize me, saying how I was bringing down the vibe of the whole day. She even remarked that if she ever passed away, she would never want her son, Robin, to be this depressed and gloomy around others. At this moment, I just could not hold back my anger any longer, and went off on a rant about how she had no business telling me how I should handle my grief when I was the one who had lost her mother. I didn't stop there. I told her that if she truly believed I was ruining the vibe, then she should have stayed home, as all I wanted was to spend time mourning my mother and talking to my dad. My dad and Gina looked taken aback by my outburst, and I felt embarrassed about everything, so I stormed out of the restaurant to clear my head. Later, my dad emerged with a solemn expression and told me that while he understood my perspective, I should be more considerate of his wife, who had sacrificed her whole day to be there with me. I questioned why he had even brought her along when I had specifically asked to spend the day with just him. My dad replied that Gina thought I was becoming too dependent, and as an adult daughter, I shouldn't spend so much time alone with him. I almost had tears rolling down my cheek hearing those words, as it reminded me of my childhood when my dad would get angry if I needed more of his attention and would scold me for being needy. I don't know if I was actually being needy or clingy that day, but I just knew that I missed my mom even more, as she would have never made me feel bad for crying. The car ride home was quiet, and Gina refused to talk to me, even though I tried to apologize. Dad told me several days after that incident about how Gina was still pissed at me for my behavior. He asked me if I could come over to his place and apologize to her properly over dinner since this was all basically my fault. He said he and Gina had been fighting continuously as I embarrassed her publicly. Anger surged within me at this suggestion, and I firmly refused. I insisted that Gina's reactions were immature, maintaining that I had already extended my apologies during the car ride home. I told him that if she persisted in such theatrics, I wanted no part in it anymore. Despite my dad's efforts to sway me, I remained resolute in my decision. Ever since that day, my relationship with Gina never improved. I don't know what she told Robin, but he also refused to talk to me after that. Dad was the only one who would sometimes come over to visit me on several occasions, like during my college graduation or when I got my first job. He would beseech me again and again to apologize to Gina, saying how we could all go back to being a normal family. But I've never listened. Over the years, Gina and I have continued to not meet unless it's absolutely necessary, and we both ignore each other as much as possible if we are in the same room. The pain of losing my mother still hurts, but I am a big girl now, so I know how to handle my emotions better. I did eventually sell my mother's place after I graduated and bought a small condo for myself in the city where I currently work. I have continued to be in touch with my mother's relatives as much as I can. I'm also dating my boyfriend Harry, and we are really happy with each other. My dad has met him on several occasions, and they both bond over golf and football. Everything in my life had been going smoothly until this recent incident. My dad was about to turn 50, and because this was such a huge milestone, I wanted to throw a birthday party for him. Weeks before his birthday, I asked him if he was okay with it, and he was more than happy, telling me how he wanted to bring Gina and Robin along, and how he was hoping that this birthday party could help repair the relationship between all of us. I doubted it, but I didn't want to argue with him again, so I told him that since so many years had passed, I was open to it if Gina was okay with it too. I organized and paid for everything for my dad's party at an expensive restaurant, so all my dad and his family had to do was just show up in their best attire. That evening, me and Harry were the first ones to reach the venue, while my dad, Gina, and Robin reached an hour later. I did call my dad several times, but he did not pick up, so I already knew that something was up. As my dad walked in, I immediately noticed that he had been drinking, as he could not walk straight without Robin's help. My dad gave me a huge smile and hugged me. Gina didn't even acknowledge me and went straight up to hug my boyfriend, who looked at her uncomfortably. Robin gave me a head nod and helped my dad sit down at the table. I questioned them as to what had happened, and Robin told me that my dad had decided to pre-boot before coming, as he wanted to start his birthday pretty early. I shook my head because I had grown up watching my dad get drunk every night and knew how embarrassing he could be. Gina laughed, seeing my expression, and said loudly that I should just learn to chill and that my dad was just having fun. My eyes narrowed upon hearing her words because this was quite an expensive restaurant, and if my dad started to behave embarrassingly as he usually does when he gets drunk, then we could all be banned from this place for life. When the waiter came over with our main courses, my dad seemed completely out of it and could not even hold his fork straight. Harry and I just tried to focus on our food, while Gina and Robin kept laughing and pointing at my dad. When wine was served, my dad kept drinking, which was getting him even more drunk, even though I kept telling him to stop. Suddenly, my dad got up from the chair and loudly told us that he wanted to make a toast. Begrudgingly, I picked up my glass as he started to say how grateful he was to be turning 50 with his wonderful family and how lucky he felt to have Gina and Robin in his life. My heart sank as he continued to say that the best decision in his life was divorcing his previous wife, my mother, as that woman drove him crazy. Gina giggled hearing this, while I looked at him furiously. He continued to say that meeting Gina and marrying her saved his life because before them, his life was empty. All this while, Gina and Robin kept smiling and cheering him on as if this was something acceptable to even say in front of me. As if this wasn't enough, my dad then turned his attention to me, his words slurring together, as he continued to say that his biggest mistake in life was marrying my mother, as he got stuck with her for all those years when she got pregnant with me. He then laughed and joked loudly if I could leave him tonight to celebrate his birthday with his real family, as he wanted his next chapter in life to have no room for past mistakes. Hearing this, Robin and Gina started laughing loudly as if it was the funniest joke. I took a deep breath and knew that I could not handle this any longer. With a heavy heart and trembling hands, I called for the waiter and asked them to call for security guards. The waiter did not even hesitate, as my dad's loud words could be heard around the room, and within minutes, 2 security guards appeared at our table, their presence causing a stir among the other diners. "Sorry, sir, but we're going to have to ask you to leave," one of the guards said firmly, gesturing toward the exit. My dad's face turned red with embarrassment as he realized what was happening. He sputtered in protest, asking me to stop them, but I stood my ground, my eyes locked with his. Gina started screaming that I was embarrassing my dad in front of everyone, and that he was just having some fun on his birthday. I didn't care, and neither did the security guard, so reluctantly, my dad was escorted out along with Robin and Gina, who kept screaming at me furiously. Later, I was overcome with emotions and apologized to all the diners as well as the staff. After dinner, I left them with a hefty tip. Also, since that dinner, I have been bombarded with text messages from Gina and Robin, calling me every name in the book and saying how I ruined the vibe and that I should have just left if I didn't want to feel embarrassed by my dad's behavior. My dad has tried to contact me several times, but I have refused to pick up. Hence, I am on Reddit to ask if AITA for kicking my dad out after he said all those hurtful things to my face. Update 1. Wow, how is this post blown up in just a matter of a few hours? Okay, I get it, guys. I was right in kicking my dad out. I did not expect hundreds of commentators to support me, although I do appreciate that all of you support my decision. I still don't want any of you to write extra mean things about my dad. Regardless of how shitty he is still my dad, and I just came to Reddit too. Understand if my actions were right or wrong, and I can see that I have got my answer for now. Update 2. It's been several weeks since my last update, and for those wondering, my dad has not contacted me any further. Gina and Robin have also stopped sending me messages. It was only today that I found out that my post had gone viral, and Robin might have recognized my story, so he sent my post link to my dad. I guess my dad might have gone through the comments and seen just how many people think he and Gina were holes. I don't know how our relationship will evolve in the future, but as for now, I'm not ready to forgive him. Update 3. Hi guys, it's been almost 7 months since my last update. I can't believe that my life has improved so much since then. First of all, I joined therapy where I could unload years and years of my childhood trauma. I understand now why people feel lighter after going to therapy because I decided to cut off my dad and his family permanently with no explanations. I am doing really well in my life, and I am lucky that I have a wonderful boyfriend like Harry who understands and takes care of me. I hope this can be my last update here, as I have already moved on in my life.